78-year-old widow Rosa VILLAROEL is the matriarch of her large family. She lives in a low-income Santiago neighborhood with her daughter and her 2 grandchildren. She had little formal education and worked hard all her life, first in the fields and then as a maid to help the family get ahead.
I worked in homes where people with money didn't let the staff use the same cutlery as the masters. They did not let us eat the same food or use the same crockery either.
Over tea, her 48-year-old daughter, Solange, concedes that their economic situation has improved, but not Chile's acute class divisions. Her 23-year-old son, Esteban, studied law, the first in the family to graduate from university, but there's still an invisible barrier.
The students from the upper class have countless advantages, from not having to study and work at the same time, to access to internships and jobs. Their parents belong to the class with clout, and they are not discriminated against because of where they come from.
Although Chile does have the highest per capita income in Latin America, it also has the highest inequality index, the biggest gap between rich and poor.
In Chile, for example, if you're in the bottom of income, you will need up to 6 generations to get to the mean income.
That's not all. A recent study revealed an astonishing statistic. Women living in the wealthiest suburbs of Santiago have a life expectancy 18 years longer than their counterparts in the poorest municipalities. In men, the difference is 9 years, says Dr. Alejandra Vives.
What explains the fact that there is inequalities within the city has to do with the segregation, socioeconomic segregation across the city.
This persistent class divide helps explain the recent social outbursts in Chile. More than 2 months of ongoing protests that have brought hundreds of thousands onto the streets, demanding structural reforms to level the playing field.
We were born with different aspirations than our parents, and we feel the segregation in the upper class areas, where our parents go to work but are treated like inferiors. In our neighborhoods, there aren't any parks, any restaurants, cinemas or hospitals. We have to leave our communities to access a better life. That generates resentment and discontent.
The inequalities and class privileges in this highly stratified society have been passed on from generation to generation. Putting an end to that system is what millions of Chileans are now fighting for. Lucia, Newman, Jazeera, Santiago.
Well, for more on this story, let's speak to Javier Sajurier in London. He's a senior lecturer in politics at Queen Mary University in London. Javier, very warm welcome to the programme. What do you think that these life expectancy statistics tell us about current inequality in Chile?
Well, I think that they relate to the fact that inequalities are beyond income. And I think one of the issues that have been raised during this process is that inequality has gone down throughout the years, but actually this is reflected in the health system, it's reflected in the educational system, it's reflected in the fact that people for the poorer municipalities in Santiago have to travel hours and commute every day to actually get to the works. And we're only talking about Santiago, which is the capital where 40% of people live, but actually inequalities replicate themselves across the country in different areas. So in a way, it's just the inequality, that this is something that the UNDP observed in 2017, have a broader range of possibilities than simply income. And I think this study you mentioned about life expectancy is actually a good measure for that.
Do you think, Javier, that protests have forced some difficult conversations to front and centre and made them happen around things like inequality, healthcare and pensions?
Yes, of course. I mean, just a couple of weeks before the first protest on the 18th of October, the president of Chile was giving interviews to international media talking about the country as an oasis within Latin America, right? So when you think about that and you compare with the situation now, you see that actually this has sparked several conversations that are very difficult. Conversations about pension reform, conversations about gender inequality, both in politics and health services and others, health and of course issues of poverty and discrimination. So I think that we are now in the country having strong conversations about this process. We are going through a constitutional reform process, which is one of the most innovative ones in the world, and it has been all triggered by these protests.
We see this pattern of inequality, don't we, across other parts of the globe and also in other parts of the region. What does it take to narrow the gap in these societies and reduce this pattern?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. I mean, political scientists and social scientists in general have long discussed about whether it's institutions or actual changes in behavior and culture. And my opinion is it's both. So obviously the country and across the world, there is a change in institutions to force people to incorporate other views and to end discrimination patterns. So for example, in the case of Chile, they're now instituting or discussing how can they ensure equal participation of women into the new constitutional process. Things like that are really important. But the most important thing is how they change long-standing trends of discrimination that have gone all the way from class struggles to gender discrimination and other issues. So I think the most complicated problem is that they're a mixture of colonial legacies, also a mixture of the dictatorships of these Latin American and how they embedded a system in which individual merit is the main driver, but actually there are structural inequalities that are not being recognized.
Javier Sajuria, their lecturer in politics, Queen Mary's University of London. Thank you very much for joining us, sir, with your thoughts.
Thank you.